Chapter 1. The Dawn of Humanity. Picture this moment. You're standing on the endless grasslands of ancient Africa, 2.5 million years ago. The sun beats down mercilessly on golden savanna grass that stretches beyond the horizon. Somewhere in the distance, a group of strange creatures moves across the landscape. They walk upright like you and me, but something is different. Something revolutionary is about to happen. These creatures don't know it yet, but they're about to change everything. They're about to become the very first humans. Not quite like us, not quite like the apes they came from, but something entirely new. Something that would one day build cities, write stories, and even create the technology you're using to watch this video right now. This is the story of Homo Habilis, the handyman, the very first member of our human family tree. And their story is far more incredible, mysterious, and controversial than you might imagine. What makes this story so fascinating is that we're still discovering new things about these ancient relatives. Every fossil tells a different story. Every bone raises new questions. And some of the biggest mysteries about human evolution still center around these remarkable creatures who lived so long ago. But here's what makes it even more interesting. Some scientists don't even believe Homo habilis existed as a separate species. That's right. There's an ongoing debate in the scientific community about whether our supposed first human ancestors were real or just a case of mistaken identity. We'll dive deep into this controversy later, but for now, let's imagine we could travel back in time to meet them. If you could somehow transport a Homo habilis individual to our modern world, dress them in contemporary clothes, and have them walk down a busy street, they would definitely turn heads. Not because they looked completely inhuman, but because they looked almost human. Almost like us, but not quite. There would be something unsettling about their appearance that you couldn't quite put your finger on. Their face would be the giveaway. Longer and more protruding than ours. Eyes set higher on their skull. A much flatter nose with large forward-facing nostrils. And their forehead, their forehead would be tools with the specific intention of making other tools better. Think about that for a moment. They weren't just picking up a convenient rock to crack something open. They were taking rocks and deliberately hitting them against other rocks to make them sharper, more effective, more useful. They were thinking ahead. They were planning. They were problem-solving in ways that no animal before them had ever done. And this brings us to one of the most controversial questions in all of human evolution. If Homo habilis was so revolutionary, if they were really the first humans, then why don't we have more evidence of their incredible intelligence? Why aren't there more sophisticated tools? Why don't we see signs of art, or complex shelters, or evidence of advanced communication? This is where things get really interesting, and where scientists start to disagree with each other. Some researchers argue that we're looking at Homo habilis all wrong. Maybe they weren't as advanced as we think. Maybe they were just lucky apes who happened to figure out how to hit rocks together. Or maybe, and this is where it gets controversial, maybe they were actually much more intelligent than we give them credit for. And we simply haven't found the right evidence yet. Before we go further, I'd love to know what you think about this mystery. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to meet our earliest human ancestors? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. And if you're enjoying this journey back in time, consider hitting that subscribe button. We're going to be exploring many more fascinating chapters in human evolution, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. But there's something else that makes the Homo habilis story absolutely captivating. These weren't the only human-like creatures living in Africa at the time. In fact, there were at least 4 different species of early humans all sharing the same landscape, all competing for resources, all trying to survive in one of the most dangerous environments Earth has ever known. Can you imagine what it must have been like? Different species of early humans encountering each other on the vast African plains. Did they recognize each other as relatives? Did they communicate? Did they fight over territory and resources? Or did they simply avoid each other? Transformation was, we need to go back even further in time and meet the creatures that came before Homo habilis. These were the Australopithecines, the southern apes, and they were unlike anything alive today. Picture a creature that was part ape, part something else entirely. They walked upright like humans, but they still had the long arms, sloped faces, and small brains of their tree-dwelling ancestors. The most famous of these creatures is probably Lucy, the Australopithecus afarensis individual, whose skeleton was discovered in 1974. Lucy and her kind lived between about 4 and 2 million years ago, and they were the bridge between our ape ancestors and the first true humans. But here's where things get really controversial in the scientific world. How exactly did this transformation happen? How did creatures like Lucy evolve into creatures like Homo habilis? And perhaps most importantly, why did it happen when it did? There are several competing theories, and scientists are still debating them fiercely today. Some researchers believe it was all about climate change. Around 2.8 million years ago, the Earth entered a period of dramatic climate shift. Africa began to dry out, and the vast forests that had covered much of the continent started to shrink and fragment. Imagine being an early ape living in these changing times. For millions of years, your ancestors had lived safely in the trees, swinging from branch to branch, finding food and shelter in the forest canopy. But now, the forests were disappearing. The trees were becoming more scattered. If you wanted to survive, you had to spend more and more time on the ground. This is where natural selection really kicked in. The individuals who were better at walking upright had an advantage. They could travel longer distances across the open grasslands. They could see predators coming from farther away. They could use their newly freed hands to carry food, tools, and even their young. But there's another theory that's even more intriguing and controversial. Some scientists believe that the evolution of Homo habilis wasn't just about adapting to life on the ground. It was about adapting to a completely new way of getting food. Think about it this way. When you might be missing the point. Scavenging successfully requires incredible intelligence, planning, and cooperation. You have to track dangerous predators from a safe distance. You have to wait for the perfect moment to move in. You have to work together as a group to drive off other scavengers. And you have to do all of this while avoiding becoming prey yourself. But here's the really controversial part. If this theory is correct, it means that our earliest human ancestors weren't noble hunters bravely pursuing game across the African plains. They were opportunistic scavengers, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their chance to steal someone else's meal. Does this change how you think about human evolution? Does it matter whether our ancestors were hunters or scavengers? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're finding this as fascinating as I am, don't forget to hit that like button to let me know you want to see more content like this. But there's yet another theory that's even more controversial than the scavenging hypothesis. Some scientists believe that the evolution of Homo habilis was triggered by something completely different, the development of cooking. Now I know what you're thinking. Cooking? But didn't early humans discover fire much later? And you're absolutely right to question this. There's no definitive evidence that Homo habilis controlled fire. But some researchers argue that they might have learned to take advantage of natural fires. Wildfires caused by lightning strikes, volcanic activity, or other natural causes. The idea is this: When these natural fires swept across the African grasslands, they would leave behind cooked meat from animals that couldn't escape. Early humans, who learned to seek out these fire sites and eat the cooked meat, would have gained a significant nutritional advantage. Cooked meat is easier to digest, provides more calories, and requires less energy to chew and process. This nutritional advantage could have fueled brain growth, which in turn led to more sophisticated tool use, better problem-solving abilities, and ultimately, the emergence of true human intelligence. But here's what makes this theory so controversial. It suggests that one of the most fundamental human activities, cooking, might be much older than we previously thought. It implies that our relationship with fire and our ability to transform a blink of an eye in geological time. What caused such rapid change? Was it climate, diet, social behavior, or something else entirely? The debate continues, and every new fossil discovery has the potential to change our understanding of this crucial period in human history. But before we can truly appreciate the significance of these changes, we need to understand exactly what Homo habilis looked like, how their bodies were built, and what made them so different from everything that had come before. Chapter 3: Anatomy of our Ancestors. Close your eyes for a moment and try to imagine what it would feel like to inhabit the body of a Homo habilis. You're about to discover that these early humans were built in ways that might surprise you, and in ways that reveal just how remarkable their evolutionary journey really was. Standing about 5 feet tall, a typical Homo habilis male would have been shorter than most modern humans, but taller and more robust than their Australopithecine predecessors. But it's not their height that would have caught your attention first. It would have been their incredible combination of human and ape-like features that created something entirely unique in the history of life on Earth. Let's start with their hands, because this is where some of the most revolutionary changes took place. For the first time in evolutionary history, we see hands that were capable of what scientists call a precision grip. This means they could touch their thumb to their fingertips with enough dexterity and control to manipulate small objects with incredible accuracy. Think about what you're doing right now as you watch this video. Maybe you're holding a phone, adjusting the volume, or scrolling through comments. Every one of these actions requires the precision grip that first evolved in Homo habilis. Without this seemingly simple anatomical development, none of our modern technology would be possible. But here's what's truly fascinating about their hands. They were still partly adapted for life in the trees. Their fingers were longer and more curved than ours, perfect for grasping branches and swinging through the forest canopy. This tells us that even though Homo habilis was taking its first steps toward a fully ground-dwelling lifestyle, they hadn't completely abandoned their arboreal heritage. This creates an interesting paradox that scientists for climbing and forward-reaching, useful for tool manipulation and carrying objects while walking upright. But it's their legs and pelvis that really tell the story of human evolution. The pelvis of Homo habilis shows clear adaptations for bipedal walking, but with some fascinating differences from our own. Their pelvis was wider and more flared than ours, which would have given them a slightly different walking gait, probably more of a waddle than our smooth, striding walk. However, recent research has revealed something unexpected about their locomotion abilities. Analysis of their leg bones suggests that Homo habilis may have been capable of running for extended periods, much longer than their predecessors. This endurance running ability would have been crucial for their survival on the open savannas, whether they were pursuing scavenging opportunities or fleeing from predators. Now, let's talk about perhaps the most controversial aspect of Homo habilis anatomy, their brain. At roughly 600 cubic centimeters, their brain was almost twice the size of their Australopithecine ancestors, but still less than half the size of a modern human brain. But here's the question that keeps scientists up at night. What were they doing with all that extra brain power? Some researchers argue that this brain expansion was primarily related to tool use and manufacture. The neural pathways required for precise hand coordination, forward planning, and problem-solving would have required significant brain development. Others believe that the larger brain was related to more complex social behaviors, the ability to live in larger groups, communicate more effectively, and coordinate activities. But there's a third possibility that's even more intriguing. What if the brain expansion in Homo habilis was related to their ability to understand and manipulate their environment in ways we haven't yet discovered? What if they were capable of more sophisticated behaviors than the archaeological record currently shows us? This brings us to one of the most heated debates in paleoanthropology today. Some scientists argue that we've been underestimating the intelligence and capabilities of Homo habilis. They point to subtle evidence in the fossil record, the precision of their tool-making, the strategic placement of their living sites, the apparent planning involved in their activities, significant change in diet, probably the inclusion of more meat, and possibly even processed foods. But here's where things get really controversial. Some researchers have suggested that the dental changes in Homo habilis indicate they were already processing their food in sophisticated ways, not just using tools to cut meat, but possibly pounding plant materials to make them easier to digest, or even using fire to cook food. If this is true, it would mean that some of the most fundamental human behaviors, cooking, food processing, meal planning, might be much older than we previously thought. It would suggest that Homo habilis wasn't just using tools to survive, but was already beginning to transform their environment in ways that would eventually lead to agriculture, cooking, and all the technologies that followed. The more we learn about Homo habilis anatomy, the more questions arise about what these early humans were really capable of. Were they simple tool users, or were they already showing signs of the complex thinking and planning abilities that would eventually lead to modern human civilization? And speaking of tools, you're about to discover that the relationship between Homo habilis and their stone implements is far more sophisticated and controversial than most people realize. What we thought we knew about early human tool use has been challenged by recent discoveries that suggest our ancestors might have been much more innovative than we ever imagined. If you're enjoying this deep dive into human evolution and want to see more content exploring these fascinating scientific debates, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. We're going to continue exploring the mysteries of our ancient past, and trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you think you know about early human intelligence. Chapter 4: The Tool Revolution. Imagine holding a piece of technology that's over 2 million years old. Not just any technology, but the very first technology ever deliberately created by a thinking being. This is exactly what archaeologists experience when they hold an Oldowan tool, the stone implements created by Homo habilis that represent humanity's first step toward transforming the natural world. But here's what makes this story absolutely fascinating. The creation of these tools represents one of the most controversial and debated topics in all of archaeology. Because Olduvai Gorge, where Mary Leakey first discovered these implements, represents something that had never existed before in the history of life on Earth. For the first time, a living creature was deliberately modifying objects to make them more useful for specific tasks. Now, you might be thinking, but lots of animals use tools. Chimps use twigs to fish for termites. Sea otters use rocks to crack shells. What's so special about what Homo habilis was doing? And that's exactly the right question to ask, because the answer reveals just how revolutionary their behavior really was. The key difference lies in what archaeologists call secondary tool use. When a chimp uses a twig to get termites, they're using the twig as it naturally exists. They might strip off some leaves, but they're not fundamentally changing the structure of the tool. Homo habilis, on the other hand, was taking rocks and deliberately hitting them in specific ways to change their shape and create sharp edges that didn't exist before. But here's where the controversy really begins. Recent analysis of Oldowan tools has revealed something that has shaken the archaeological community to its core. These tools show evidence of much more sophisticated planning and foresight than anyone previously imagined. When scientists examined the fracture patterns on these ancient stone tools, they discovered that Homo habilis wasn't just randomly hitting rocks together until they got a sharp edge. They were carefully selecting specific types of stone, understanding the properties of different materials, and using complex striking techniques that required extensive practice and learning. Think about what this means. It suggests that Homo habilis had developed a sophisticated understanding of physics, how force, angle, and material properties interact to produce specific results. They understood that different types of stone would fracture in different ways. They knew which angles would produce the sharpest edges. They could visualize the final tool before they began the manufacturing process. This level of cognitive sophistication is staggering when you really think about it. We're talking about mental abilities that some researchers argue rival those of modern humans in certain specific areas. But the controversy doesn't stop there. In recent years, archaeologists have discovered evidence that scientists argue that tool-making ability evolved much earlier than we thought, possibly in the Australopithecine lineage itself. Others contend that these early tools were made by an unknown species of early human that we haven't discovered yet. Still others question whether these ancient implements are actually tools at all, suggesting they might be naturally fractured rocks that only look like human-made implements. This debate has profound implications for how we understand human evolution. If tool-making appeared before the genus Homo, it means that the cognitive revolution we associate with early humans might have much deeper roots than we previously imagined. But let's get back to what we know for certain about Homo habilis and their tools. The evidence shows that they created several distinct types of implements, each designed for specific purposes. There were choppers for breaking bones and accessing marrow, scrapers for processing hides and plant materials, and cutting tools for slicing meat and other soft materials. The sophistication of this toolkit is remarkable when you consider that it remained essentially unchanged for over 1 million years. Think about that for a moment. Homo habilis developed a tool technology that was so effective, so perfectly adapted to their needs, that it persisted with only minor modifications for longer than our entire species has existed. But here's what makes the story even more fascinating. Recent archaeological discoveries have uncovered evidence that Homo habilis wasn't just making tools. They were transporting raw materials over considerable distances to create them. At sites throughout East Africa, archaeologists have found Oldowan tools made from stone that originated dozens of miles away from where the tools were discovered. This means that Homo habilis individuals were either traveling long distances to obtain specific types of stone, or they were planning ahead, collecting materials during their travels and carrying them for extended periods until they needed to make tools. Either scenario suggests a level of forward planning and spatial awareness that's truly remarkable for such early humans. They weren't just living in the moment, reacting to immediate needs. They were thinking ahead, planning for future contingencies, and making strategic decisions about resource acquisition and tool production. And then there's the most controversial discovery of all. In 1962, Mary Leake have created such a regular, deliberate arrangement. But if Homo habilis created this structure, it would represent the earliest known architecture in human history. It would mean that these early humans weren't just making tools. They were designing and constructing shelters, planning living spaces, and organizing their environment in sophisticated ways. The implications are staggering. If Homo habilis was building shelters 1.8 million years ago, what else were they capable of? Were they also creating other structures that haven't survived in the archaeological record? Were they organizing their living sites in complex ways? Were they already showing signs of the spatial planning abilities that would eventually lead to cities and civilizations? This discovery has sparked fierce debate in the archaeological community. Some researchers embrace it as evidence that we've been underestimating the capabilities of early humans. Others argue that the stone circle could have been created by natural processes we don't fully understand, or that it might have been made by a later, more advanced human species. The debate continues today, and every new discovery has the potential to either support or challenge our understanding of what Homo habilis was really capable of. But one thing is certain. These early humans were doing things with stone that had never been done before in the history of life on Earth. What do you think? Were these early humans more sophisticated than we give them credit for? Or are we reading too much into the limited evidence we have? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to continue exploring these fascinating debates about human evolution. But tools were just one part of the Homo habilis story. To really understand these early humans, we need to explore the world they lived in. A world filled with dangers, opportunities, and other human species that were competing for the same resources. The social and environmental pressures they faced would shape not just their tools, but their entire way of life. Chapter 5. Life in the Ancient World. Step back in time with me to the African savannas of 2 million years ago. The sun is rising over more complex and sophisticated than anyone previously imagined. Let's start with perhaps the most controversial aspect of their daily life, their social structure. For decades, scientists assumed that early humans lived in small, simple family groups, much like modern chimpanzees. But new evidence suggests that Homo habilis may have developed social organizations that were far more advanced and complex. Analysis of fossil sites has revealed that these early humans were living in groups that may have included 60 to 80 individuals, much larger than the small family units researchers once imagined. But here's what makes this discovery so significant. Managing a group of this size requires sophisticated social skills, communication abilities, and leadership structures that we're only beginning to understand. Think about what it takes to coordinate the activities of 80 individuals in a dangerous environment. You need ways to communicate about food sources, predator threats, and travel plans. You need systems for resolving conflicts and making group decisions. You need leaders who can organize activities and followers who understand their roles. Recent studies of Homo habilis fossil sites have uncovered evidence that suggests these early humans may have developed some of the first forms of organized social behavior in human history. At several locations, archaeologists have found what appear to be designated areas for different activities: tool-making zones, food processing areas, and even what might have been sleeping quarters. This kind of spatial organization requires planning, communication, and social cooperation on a level that we typically associate with much later periods in human evolution. It suggests that Homo habilis wasn't just randomly wandering the African landscape in search of food. They were organizing their daily lives in sophisticated ways. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of their social life relates to one of the most fundamental human behaviors: pair bonding. There's growing evidence that Homo habilis may have been among the first human species to practice monogamy or long-term pair bonding. Now, this might not sound particularly remarkable until you consider what it means from an evolutionary perspective. Most of our closest living relatives, chimpanzees and bonobos, have very different mating systems. The development of long-term pairs, their tool-making abilities and larger brain size. The logic goes like this. As tools became more complex, it took longer for children to learn how to make and use them effectively. This required extended childhood periods, which in turn required more parental investment. Long-term pair bonding made this extended parental care possible. But here's where the debate gets really interesting. Not all scientists agree with this interpretation. Some argue that the evidence for monogamy in Homo habilis is inconclusive, and that these early humans might have had social structures that were completely different from anything we see in the modern world. The truth is, understanding the social lives of creatures who lived 2 million years ago is incredibly challenging. We can't observe their behavior directly. We can't hear their communications. All we have are bones, stones, and the traces they left behind in the archaeological record. But those traces tell a fascinating story about daily life in the ancient world. Evidence from fossil sites suggests that Homo habilis had developed sophisticated strategies for finding and processing food. They weren't just opportunistic scavengers grabbing whatever they could find. They were organized foragers with detailed knowledge of their environment. Analysis of the tools and food remains found at Homo habilis sites reveals that these early humans had intimate knowledge of seasonal patterns, animal behaviors, and plant resources. They knew when and where certain foods would be available. They planned their movements around these resource cycles. They even developed specialized tools for processing different types of food. For example, researchers have found evidence that Homo habilis used different tool types for processing plant materials versus animal products. They had cutting tools specifically designed for slicing meat, grinding stones for processing tough plant fibers, and even what appear to be specialized implements for cracking open bones to access the nutrient-rich marrow inside. This level of specialization suggests that food procurement and processing had become a complex, organized activity that required significant planning and cooperation. It wasn't just about finding enough calories to survive. It was about maximizing the nutritional value of available resources through sophisticated processing techniques. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Homo habilis' daily life was their relationship with their environment. Recent research predictable locations and even create cleared areas that were easier to navigate and defend. If this interpretation is correct, it would mean that Homo habilis was already practicing a primitive form of landscape management 2 million years ago. They were thinking about their environment not just as a source of immediate resources, but as a system that could be manipulated and improved through human intervention. The implications of this discovery are profound. It suggests that the human ability to transform and manage natural environments, the same ability that would eventually lead to agriculture, cities, and modern civilization, has much deeper evolutionary roots than anyone previously imagined. But life in the ancient world wasn't just about food procurement and environmental management. Homo habilis also had to deal with one of the most challenging aspects of existence in prehistoric Africa: the constant threat of predation. The grasslands and savannas where these early humans lived were dominated by some of the most formidable predators in Earth's history. And the strategies that Homo habilis developed for dealing with these threats would shape not only their daily behavior, but the entire trajectory of human evolution. Are you starting to see why the story of Homo habilis is so much more complex and fascinating than most people realize? These weren't simple, primitive creatures struggling to survive in a harsh world. They were sophisticated social beings who were already developing many of the cognitive and behavioral strategies that would eventually define human civilization. If you're finding this exploration as captivating as I am, make sure to like this video and subscribe to see more deep dives into the mysteries of human evolution. Because what we're about to discover about the predators and competitors that Homo habilis faced will give you a completely new appreciation for just how remarkable their survival and success really were. Chapter 6. Dangerous Neighbors. The African savannas of 2 million years ago were a paradise for predators and a nightmare for prey. And Homo habilis, despite their growing intelligence and tool-making abilities, were very much on the menu for some of the most terrifying carnivores that have ever walked the earth. But here's what makes their story so remarkable. Not only waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This wasn't a world where you could let your guard down for even a moment. Every step outside the safety of your group was potentially a step toward death. And yet, somehow, Homo habilis not only survived in this environment, they flourished. The fossil record tells us about several specific predators that would have posed constant threats to our early human ancestors. Let's start with perhaps the most terrifying, the saber-toothed cats of the genera Dinophilis and Meganterion. Dinophilis, sometimes called the false saber-tooth, was a cat roughly the size of a modern leopard, but with proportionally longer legs and more powerful muscles. What made this predator particularly dangerous for early humans was its hunting strategy. Unlike modern big cats that typically hunt alone, Dinophilis appears to have been a pack hunter, working in coordinated groups to bring down prey. But it was Meganterion that really earned its reputation as the human killer. This was a saber-toothed cat specifically adapted for hunting primates. Its canine teeth were perfectly designed for piercing the skull and severing the spinal cord of human-sized prey. Fossil evidence shows that Meganterion was responsible for the deaths of numerous early human individuals, including several Homo habilis specimens. One particularly chilling piece of evidence comes from a Homo habilis skull discovered at Svartkrans cave in South Africa. The skull shows 2 perfectly round puncture wounds that match exactly with the spacing of Meganterion's saber teeth. This individual was killed by a saber-toothed cat, and the precision of the wounds suggests it was a quick, efficient execution. But big cats weren't the only threat. The hunting hyenas of the genus Chasmoporthetes were perhaps even more dangerous because of their pack hunting strategies and incredible endurance. These weren't the scavenging hyenas we know today. They were cursorial hunters, built for running down prey across long distances. Imagine being pursued by a pack of these creatures across the open savanna. They had the leg length and build of modern cheetahs, but with the bone-crushing jaws of modern hyenas. Was cooperation. Evidence from fossil sites suggests that Homo habilis lived in larger groups than their predecessors, and that these groups worked together in sophisticated ways to detect and respond to predator threats. Recent analysis of Homo habilis living sites has revealed what appear to be organized lookout posts, elevated positions where individuals could watch for approaching predators while the rest of the group went about their daily activities. The positioning of these lookout points shows clear evidence of strategic thinking and group coordination. But cooperation alone wasn't enough. Homo habilis also developed what might have been the first early warning system in human history. Evidence suggests that these early humans used complex vocalizations to communicate information about predator threats across their territory. Now, we can't know exactly what these vocalizations sounded like, but analysis of their vocal tract anatomy suggests they were capable of producing a much wider range of sounds than their predecessors. And the strategic placement of their living sites, often on elevated ground with good visibility in all directions, suggests they were using these vocal abilities to maintain contact across considerable distances. Perhaps most remarkably, Homo habilis appears to have developed the first anti-predator tools in human history. While their stone implements were primarily used for food processing, there's growing evidence that they also created weapons specifically designed for defense against large carnivores. At several sites, archaeologists have discovered sharpened wooden stakes and pointed stone implements that show signs of having been thrust into large animals. The positioning and context of these finds suggest they were used not for hunting, but for defending against predator attacks. This represents a completely new approach to predator-prey relationships. Instead of simply fleeing or hiding when threatened, Homo habilis was fighting back. They were using their intelligence and tool-making abilities to level the playing field with creatures that were physically much more powerful. But perhaps the most controversial aspect of their anti-predator strategies involves fire. While there's no definitive evidence that Homo habilis could control fire, there are intriguing hints that they may have learned to use natural fires for protection against predators. Several fossil sites contain evidence of fire use in contexts that suggest defensive rather than cooking purposes. Charcoal deposits around living areas, just adapting to their dangerous world. They were finding ways to make it less dangerous. But the most remarkable thing about Homo habilis anti-predator strategies is how they reveal the birth of human cooperation and communication. Surviving in such a dangerous environment required levels of group coordination that had never existed before in the animal kingdom. Think about what it takes to successfully defend a group of 60 to 80 individuals against pack-hunting carnivores. You need lookouts who can spot threats from a distance. You need communication systems that can rapidly alert the entire group. You need coordination strategies that allow individuals to work together effectively under extreme stress. And you need backup plans for when the primary defense strategies fail. The development of these capabilities in Homo habilis represents one of the most significant cognitive leaps in human evolution. These early humans weren't just using their intelligence to make tools or find food. They were using it to solve complex social and strategic problems that required unprecedented levels of cooperation and planning. And this brings us to one of the most intriguing questions about early human evolution. Did the constant pressure of predation actually accelerate the development of human intelligence? Some researchers argue that the cognitive demands of avoiding predators, while simultaneously competing with other human species for resources, created an evolutionary pressure cooker that drove rapid brain development. This predation pressure hypothesis suggests that many of the characteristics we associate with human intelligence, complex communication, strategic thinking, group cooperation, tool use, evolved primarily as anti-predator adaptations that were later applied to other challenges. If this theory is correct, it means we owe our intelligence partly to the saber-toothed cats and hunting hyenas that terrorized our ancestors 2 million years ago. The very creatures that were trying to eat our ancestors may have inadvertently created the selection pressures that led to the evolution of human civilization. But surviving predators was only part of the challenge facing Homo habilis. They also had to compete with other human species for territory and resources. And these interactions may have been even more complex and significant than their relationships with non-human predators. What do you think about this idea that predator pressure helped drive human evolution? The mystery of their society. Here's something that will blow your mind. 2 million years ago, Africa was home to at least 4 different species of early humans, all living in the same region, all competing for the same resources, all trying to survive in the same dangerous world. And Homo habilis was right in the middle of this incredible evolutionary experiment. Can you imagine what it must have been like when different species of early humans encountered each other? Did they recognize each other as relatives? Did they compete violently for territory? Did they avoid each other entirely? Or, and this is where things get really controversial, did they actually cooperate and even interbreed? This is one of the greatest mysteries in human evolution, and recent discoveries are forcing scientists to completely reconsider what we thought we knew about early human societies and interactions. Let's start by meeting Homo habilis' neighbors. Living alongside them in the grasslands and woodlands of eastern South Africa were Homo rudolfensis, Australopithecus boisei, also known as Paranthropus boisei, and possibly early populations of Homo erectus. Each of these species had different physical characteristics, different tool technologies, and different survival strategies. Homo rudolfensis was perhaps the most similar to Homo habilis. So similar, in fact, that some scientists argue they were actually the same species. But recent analysis suggests they were distinct, with rudolfensis having a larger brain and more robust build. They appear to have been more successful hunters, with evidence of more sophisticated tool use and possibly even early forms of organized hunting strategies. Australopithecus boisei, on the other hand, was completely different. These were the robust Australopithecines, powerfully built early humans, with massive jaws and teeth designed for processing tough, fibrous plant materials. They were specialists, perfectly adapted for a vegetarian lifestyle in woodland environments. And then there was Homo erectus, the species that would eventually replace all the others and become the first human ancestor to migrate out of Africa. They were taller, had larger brains, and used more sophisticated tools than any of their contemporaries. Now, here's what makes this situation so fascinating. Sites where multiple human species lived has revealed something unexpected. Evidence of technology transfer between species. At several locations, archaeologists have found Oldowan tools, the type typically associated with Homo habilis, alongside more advanced Acheulean tools that were supposedly invented much later by Homo erectus. But here's the kicker. The dating shows that both tool types were being used simultaneously by different species in the same area. This suggests that early human species weren't completely isolated from each other. They were observing each other's technologies and possibly even learning from each other. Some researchers have gone so far as to suggest that there may have been direct technology transfer, that individuals from different species actually taught each other how to make different types of tools. If this is true, it would represent one of the first examples of cultural exchange in human history. It would mean that learning and innovation in early humans wasn't limited to within-species transmission, but actually involved interspecies communication and cooperation. But the evidence for interaction between early human species goes beyond just tools. Genetic analysis of fossil remains has revealed something even more controversial. Possible evidence of interbreeding between different early human species. Now, this is where the scientific community gets really divided. Some researchers argue that the genetic evidence clearly shows hybridization between early human species, similar to what we now know happened between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals much later in human evolution. Others contend that the genetic similarities between early human species are simply due to their recent common ancestry, and that true interbreeding would have been biologically impossible or extremely rare. The debate has profound implications for how we understand human evolution. If early human species were regularly interbreeding, it suggests that the boundaries between different species were much more fluid than we typically imagine. It would mean that human evolution wasn't a simple linear progression from one species to another, but a complex network of interrelated populations that were constantly exchanging genes and technologies. But let's get back to what we can say with more certainty about Homo habilis society. Analysis of their living sites has revealed evidence of social behaviors that were remarkably sophisticated for such early humans. At Olduvai Gorge and other key sites, archaeologists have social cooperation on a level that's truly remarkable for creatures with brains less than half the size of modern humans. It suggests that Homo habilis had developed complex social roles, with different individuals specializing in different activities and contributing to the group in different ways. Even more intriguingly, Some sites show evidence of what might have been leadership structures. At several locations, archaeologists have found central hearth areas surrounded by evidence of tool-making and food processing activities. The positioning suggests that certain individuals may have occupied positions of authority or influence within the group. But perhaps the most controversial aspect of Homo habilis social behavior involves their possible use of symbolic communication. While there's no evidence of art or writing from this period, some researchers argue that certain aspects of their tool-making and site organization show signs of symbolic thinking. For example, at some sites, Homo habilis appears to have deliberately arranged stones and tools in patterns that served no obvious functional purpose. Some archaeologists interpret these arrangements as early forms of symbolic expression, the first tentative steps toward the symbolic thinking that would eventually lead to art, language, and complex culture. Other researchers are more skeptical, arguing that what appears to be symbolic behavior might actually have functional explanations that we simply don't understand yet. The debate continues, but the possibility that Homo habilis was already beginning to think symbolically 2 million years ago is tantalizing. There's also growing evidence that Homo habilis may have had more sophisticated communication abilities than previously thought. Analysis of their skull structure suggests that they had vocal tract adaptations that would have allowed for a wider range of vocalizations than their predecessors. While they certainly didn't have language as we understand it, they may have had a complex system of calls, gestures, and sounds that allowed for detailed communication about their environment, social relationships, and group activities. Recent studies of modern great apes have shown that our closest living relatives are capable of much more sophisticated communication than we previously realized. If Homo habilis had even slightly more advanced communication abilities than modern apes, it could explain how they were able to coordinate the complex social behaviors we see in the archaeological record. But here's what simultaneously. It wasn't just about cooperation for its own sake. It was about developing social strategies that could enhance survival in an incredibly challenging environment. The success of these strategies is evident in the fossil record. Despite facing threats from multiple predator species and competition from other human species, Homo habilis persisted for nearly 1 million years. That's longer than our own species has existed. Their social innovations didn't just help them survive. They laid the foundation for all future humans' social evolution. The cooperation, communication, and leadership structures they developed would be refined and expanded by later human species, eventually leading to the complex societies we see today. But every success story eventually comes to an end, and the story of Homo habilis is no exception. What caused these successful, innovative early humans to eventually disappear from the fossil record? The answer involves climate change, competition, and one of the most dramatic environmental shifts in Earth's history. If you're fascinated by these insights into early human society and want to explore more mysteries of human evolution, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because what we're about to discover about the end of the Homo habilis story will reveal just how fragile even the most successful evolutionary adaptations can be. Chapter 8. Survival against all odds. For nearly 1 million years, Homo habilis defied every odds stacked against them. They survived in a world filled with saber-toothed predators, competed successfully against multiple other human species, and managed to spread across vast regions of Africa while developing technologies and social behaviors that had never existed before. But around 1.4 million years ago, something changed. The fossil record shows a gradual decline in Homo habilis populations, and by about 1.2 million years ago, they had disappeared entirely from the archaeological record. What caused the end of our earliest human ancestors? And what can their fate teach us about survival, adaptation, and the precarious nature of evolutionary success? The story of Homo habilis' decline is actually a story about one of the most dramatic climate changes in Earth's history, and it reveals just how vulnerable even the most successful species can be when environmental conditions shift rapidly. Around 1.8 million years ago, and open deserts, food sources that had been reliable for countless generations suddenly became unpredictable or disappeared entirely. But here's what makes this story so fascinating from a scientific perspective. The climate changes that spelled doom for Homo habilis actually created opportunities for other human species. While habilis populations were declining, Homo erectus was thriving and expanding, eventually becoming the first human species to migrate out of Africa and colonize Asia. This suggests that the end of Homo habilis wasn't simply a matter of environmental catastrophe. It was about competitive replacement by a species that was better adapted to the new environmental conditions. Recent research has revealed just how dramatic this competitive replacement really was. Analysis of fossil sites from this period shows a clear pattern. As Homo erectus populations expanded into new territories, Homo habilis populations in the same areas declined and eventually disappeared. The evidence suggests that Homo erectus had several crucial advantages that made them more competitive in the changing climate conditions. They were taller and more robust, which would have given them advantages in both hunting and defending territory. They had larger brains, which allowed for more sophisticated tool-making and problem-solving. And perhaps most importantly, they appear to have had more advanced social organization that allowed them to coordinate activities across larger groups and territories. But the competition between these early human species wasn't just about physical or cognitive advantages. It was also about technology. Homo erectus brought with them a revolutionary new tool technology known as the Acheulean industry. While Homo habilis had mastered the creation of simple choppers and scrapers, Homo erectus developed the hand axe, a symmetrical, bifacially worked tool that required much more sophisticated planning and manufacturing skills. These hand axes were not only more effective for processing food and materials, but they also represented a completely new level of cognitive sophistication in tool design. The development of Acheulean technology appears to have given Homo erectus a decisive advantage in resource procurement and processing. They could access food sources that were unavailable to their Oldowan tool-making competitors, and they could process materials more efficiently, allowing them to support larger populations in the same hunting strategies that gave them access to higher quality protein sources. While Homo habilis appears to have been primarily scavengers who occasionally caught small prey, Homo erectus was actively hunting medium and large-sized animals. This shift to active hunting would have provided several advantages: more reliable access to high-quality protein, greater independence from the activities of other predators, and the ability to support larger group sizes. The evidence for this hunting behavior comes from several sources. Homo erectus sites contain the remains of much larger animals than are typically found at Homo habilis sites. The cut marks on bones from Homo erectus sites show patterns consistent with primary butchery rather than scavenging. And the tools found at these sites include implements that appear to have been specifically designed for hunting rather than just food processing. Perhaps most significantly, some Homo erectus sites contain evidence of controlled fire use. While the evidence for fire control in early human evolution is often controversial, there are several sites dating to around 1.7 million years ago that show clear signs of deliberate fire management by Homo erectus. The ability to control fire would have been a game-changing advantage. Cooked food is easier to digest and provides more calories per unit of energy expended in chewing and digestion. Fire provides protection from predators and extends the usable hours in each day. It enables survival in colder climates and allows for the processing of plant foods that would otherwise be inedible. If Homo erectus had mastered fire control, while Homo habilis had not, it would explain why erectus was able to expand into new environments and support larger populations, while habilis remained restricted to increasingly marginal habitats. But the story of Homo habilis' decline isn't just about being outcompeted by more advanced relatives. There's also evidence that they faced increasing pressure from environmental changes that made their traditional lifestyle unsustainable. One of the most significant challenges was the increasing aridity of African climates during this period. As the continent became drier, the woodland and gallery forest environments where Homo habilis populations show signs of reduced genetic diversity compared to earlier populations, suggesting that they were becoming increasingly isolated and inbred as their habitat fragmented. The combination of climate change, competitive pressure from other human species, and habitat fragmentation created what scientists call an extinction vortex, a situation where multiple negative factors reinforce each other, making recovery increasingly unlikely. But perhaps the most poignant aspect of the Homo habilis story is that their innovations and adaptations didn't disappear with them. Many of the behavioral and technological developments that first appeared in Homo habilis were refined and expanded by later human species. The Oldowan tool technology that Homo habilis pioneered continued to be used alongside more advanced tools for hundreds of thousands of years. The social behaviors they developed, cooperation, communication, group coordination, became the foundation for all future human social evolution. In a very real sense, Homo habilis didn't just disappear, they evolved. Their genetic legacy continued in their descendants, and their cultural innovations provided the foundation for all subsequent human technological and social development. This perspective transforms the story of Homo habilis from a tale of extinction to a story of transformation and continuity. These early humans weren't evolutionary dead ends. They were pioneers whose innovations made all subsequent human evolution possible. Their story also provides important insights into the nature of evolutionary success and failure. Being well adapted to current conditions doesn't guarantee survival when those conditions change rapidly. Success in evolution often depends not just on current fitness, but on the flexibility to adapt to new challenges. Homo habilis was incredibly successful for nearly 1 million years, but when conditions changed rapidly, their specializations became limitations. Homo erectus, with their more generalized adaptations and greater technological flexibility, was better positioned to thrive in the new environmental conditions. What do you think about this perspective on evolutionary success and failure? Does the story of Homo habilis change how you think about adaptation and survival in the modern world? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to continue exploring scientists mistakenly lumped together. This isn't just an academic question. It's at the heart of one of the most heated debates in all of paleoanthropology. And the implications of this debate extend far beyond just one extinct species. They challenge our fundamental understanding of how human evolution actually worked. Welcome to the Homo habilis controversy, a scientific dispute that has been raging for over 50 years and shows no signs of being resolved anytime soon. The controversy began almost immediately after Homo habilis was first described in 1964. From the very beginning, some scientists questioned whether the fossils attributed to this species actually represented a single, coherent evolutionary lineage. The problem is this: the fossils attributed to Homo habilis show an enormous amount of variation. Some individuals have much larger brains than others. Some show more ape-like characteristics, while others appear more human-like. Some are associated with simple Oldowan tools, while others are found alongside more advanced implements. This variation is so extreme that some researchers argue it's impossible that all these fossils could belong to the same species. Instead, they suggest that Homo habilis is actually a wastebasket category that includes fossils from several different human lineages that lived at different times and in different places. The most prominent critic of Homo habilis as a valid species is paleoanthropologist Bernard Wood from George Washington University. Wood has argued for decades that the fossils attributed to Homo habilis actually represent at least two, and possibly three or more, different species. According to Wood's analysis, the smaller-brained, more ape-like fossils should be classified as Australopithecus habilis, essentially an advanced Australopithecine, rather than a true member of the genus Homo. The larger-brained, more human-like fossils, he argues, should be classified as Homo rudolfensis, which he considers to be the real first member of our genus. If Wood is correct, it would mean that Homo habilis never actually existed as a distinct species. The fossils we've been studying would represent either advanced Australopithecines or early examples of other human species, but not the transitional form that scientists have long believed connected apes to humans. But the controversy doesn't stop.
Fossils would represent males of the same species. This would resolve the variation problem while maintaining Homo habilis as a valid species. Still, other researchers have proposed that the variation in Homo habilis reflects chronological changes within a single evolving lineage. According to this view, the earlier fossils show more primitive characteristics, while the later fossils show more advanced features as the species evolved over time. Each of these interpretations has different implications for how we understand early human evolution. If Homo habilis was actually multiple species, it suggests that human evolution was more diverse and complex than we previously thought. If the variation reflects sexual dimorphism, it tells us something important about early human social behavior and mating systems. If it reflects evolutionary change over time, it provides insights into the pace and pattern of human evolution. The debate has been further complicated by new fossil discoveries that seem to support different sides of the argument. In recent years, researchers have discovered fossils that some interpret as providing clear evidence for the existence of Homo habilis as a distinct species, while others argue that the same fossils actually support the multiple species hypothesis. One of the most significant discoveries came in 2015, with the announcement of a new fossil from Olduvai Gorge. The fossil, designated OH7, includes both skull and hand bones from the same individual, providing the most complete evidence yet for what Homo habilis actually looked like. Supporters of Homo habilis as a valid species argue that OH7 shows a coherent combination of features that clearly distinguish it from both Australopithecines and later human species. The hand bones in particular show adaptations for precision grip that are more advanced than those seen in Australopithecines, but less developed than those in later humans. Critics, however, argue that OH7 actually supports their position that Homo habilis is a wastebasket category. They point out that the skull features of OH7 are quite different from those of other fossils attributed to Homo habilis, suggesting that these fossils represent different species rather than variation within a single species. The controversy has also been influenced by new dating techniques that have revealed problems with some of the original fossil assignments, has been further complicated by advances in genetic analysis that have revealed the existence of ghost lineages in human evolution, species that contributed to our genetic heritage but have left no clear fossil record. Some researchers argue that the confusion surrounding Homo habilis might be partly due to interbreeding between different early human lineages. If different species were occasionally hybridizing, it would create exactly the kind of morphological variation that we see in the Homo habilis fossil record. This hybridization hypothesis is particularly controversial because it challenges the traditional view of human evolution as a branching tree with distinct species. Instead, it suggests that human evolution might have been more like a braided stream, with different lineages occasionally coming together and separating again. Recent genetic studies of later human species have provided support for this hybridization model. We now know that Homo sapiens interbred with Neanderthals and Denisovans, and there's growing evidence that similar hybridization events occurred throughout human evolution. If hybridization was common in early human evolution, it would help explain why the Homo habilis fossils are so variable and why it's so difficult to draw clear boundaries between different early human species. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the Homo habilis debate is what it reveals about the nature of scientific knowledge itself. Here, we have a species that was described over 50 years ago, that has been studied by hundreds of researchers, and that is featured in every textbook on human evolution. And yet, we still can't agree on whether it actually existed. This uncertainty isn't a failure of science. It's actually a testament to the complexity of the evidence and the rigor of the scientific process. The ongoing debate over Homo habilis reflects scientists' commitment to getting the story right, even when that means challenging long-held beliefs and comfortable assumptions. The debate also highlights one of the fundamental challenges in studying human evolution. We're trying to reconstruct a complex evolutionary history from a very incomplete fossil record. Every new discovery has the potential to either support or overturn our existing understanding. What's your take on this scientific controversy? Do you think the variation in Homo habilis fossils reflects multiple means to be human? Chapter 10, their final chapter. As we reach the end of our journey with Homo habilis, it's worth taking a moment to reflect on what these remarkable early humans have taught us about innovation, survival, and the deep history of what makes us human. Whether Homo habilis existed as a single species or represents a collection of different early human lineages, there's no disputing that the fossils and artifacts attributed to them represent one of the most important transitions in the history of life on Earth. For the first time in our planet's 4.5 billion year history, a living creature was deliberately and systematically modifying its environment through technology. These early humans weren't just adapting to the world around them, they were changing it to suit their needs. This represents a fundamentally new relationship between life and environment. Every other species in Earth's history had been shaped by natural selection to fit into existing ecological niches. But with Homo habilis, we see the beginning of a different approach, the use of intelligence and technology to create new niches and expand the possibilities for survival. The stone tools they created may seem simple to us today, but they represent one of the most revolutionary innovations in the history of life. Those carefully chipped rocks were the first step on a technological journey that would eventually lead to agriculture, cities, writing, and all the complex technologies that define modern human civilization. But perhaps even more significant than their technological innovations were their social developments. The evidence suggests that Homo habilis developed new forms of cooperation, communication, and group organization that laid the foundation for all subsequent human social evolution. The ability to coordinate activities across large groups, to share information about resources and threats, and to work together toward common goals. These capabilities first emerged in creatures like Homo habilis and became the basis for everything from modern teamwork to global civilization. Their story also provides important lessons about resilience and adaptation. For nearly 1 million years,
These early humans survived in one of the most challenging environments Earth has ever known. They faced constant issues that our earliest human ancestors dealt with, long before cities or governments existed. Their story reminds us that humans have always been problem solvers, innovators, and collaborators. The abilities that allowed Homo habilis to thrive in prehistoric Africa are the same abilities that have allowed our species to adapt to every environment on Earth, and even begin exploring space. But their story also reminds us of the fragility of even the most successful adaptations. Despite their remarkable innovations and nearly million-year run of success, Homo habilis ultimately couldn't survive the combination of climate change and competition from more advanced human species. This serves as a sobering reminder that evolutionary success is always temporary. The adaptations that make a species successful in one environment may become limitations when conditions change rapidly. Survival often depends not just on current fitness, but on the flexibility to adapt to new and unexpected challenges. For modern humans facing unprecedented global changes, the Homo habilis story offers both inspiration and caution. Their innovative problem-solving abilities and capacity for cooperation show us what's possible when humans work together to address challenges. But their ultimate fate reminds us that no species, no matter how successful, can take survival for granted. Perhaps most importantly, the story of Homo habilis challenges us to think differently about what it means to be human. These early humans didn't have language as we know it, art, writing, or complex culture, but they had something that no other species before them possessed: the ability to imagine a better future and work systematically to create it. Every time they chipped a stone to make it sharper, every time they organized their living space to make it more efficient, every time they cooperated to solve a problem or share resources, they were demonstrating the fundamental human capacity to envision improvement and work toward it. This capacity for improvement, for innovation, for working together to solve problems and create better conditions. This is what connects us across 2 million years to these early human ancestors. Whether or not Homo habilis was our direct ancestor, they were certainly our intellectual and behavioral ancestors. Their legacy lives on, not just in our genes, but in our continued commitment to using intelligence, problem-solving, and the willingness to adapt when conditions change. Their story reminds us that humans are at their best when they're working together to create solutions, sharing knowledge and resources, and using their intelligence to build better futures for themselves and their communities. Thank you for joining me on this journey back in time to meet our earliest human ancestors. If you've enjoyed exploring the mysteries and debates surrounding Homo habilis, I encourage you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What aspects of the Homo habilis story do you find most fascinating? Do their innovations and social behaviors change how you think about early human capabilities? And what lessons from their success and ultimate fate seem most relevant to our modern world? The story of human evolution is far from over. It's a continuing adventure that includes not just our past, but our future. By understanding where we came from and how our ancestors overcame seemingly impossible challenges, we gain valuable insights into how we might address the challenges we face today and continue the human tradition of innovation, cooperation, and adaptation that began with remarkable early humans like Homo habilis over 2 million years ago. Remember to stay curious, keep questioning, and never stop exploring the incredible story of what it means to be human.